Hello world, hello Philippines. Good day. Today we're going to discuss about outcome-based education and assessment. This is module 2 of your lesson for assessment 2 this semester. For our content, we are dividing, of course, our topic into 6. The first is definition of the outcome-based education. The second is principles of outcome-based education. The third is characteristics of outcome-based education. The fourth is the components of the outcome-based education. The fifth is importance of the outcome-based education. And the sixth is important terms associated with, of course, the outcome-based education. For our learning outcomes, at the end of the lesson, students should be able to, of course, number one, explain the principles, characteristics, and components of outcome-based education. Second is analyze the current scenarios and issues related to outcome-based education. And the third one is explain the meaning of constructive alignment in the context of the instructional cycle. Let's start with, of course, the definition of what is outcome-based education. According to Spady in 1994, it is a comprehensive approach to organizing and operating an education system that is focused on and defined by successful demonstration of learning sought from each student. And Spady spouses transformational OBE. When we say transformational, it is concerned with long-term cross-curricular outcomes that are related directly to students' future life roles, such as being a productive worker or a responsible citizen or a parent. Other definitions of outcome-based education is that it is a model of education whereby students demonstrate what they know and are able to do, whatever they require. Outcomes are, it is also an approach that focuses on students' learning rather than, of course, teaching. And it is an education based on outcomes. So the emphasis is, of course, the outcomes. And this outcome may refer to the immediate outcome or deferred outcome. Let's discuss what is immediate outcome. When we say immediate outcome, these are competencies or skills upon completion of the lesson or a subject, a grade, a year, a course, or a program itself. And example of this is the ability to communicate in reading, writing, speaking, and of course, solving math problem. Another is, of course, the deferred outcome. It is the ability to apply the cognitive, the psychomotor, and affective skills or competencies or the domains in the various aspects of the professional and workplace practice. That's according to Navarro in 2019. And example of this is the success in professional practice or occupation. Let's have the outcome-based teaching learning by Biggs, okay, or the Biggs version. So when we say, of course, the outcomes, it refers as the learning outcomes, which are more, of course, specific than institutional outcomes or the program outcomes and, of course, the course outcomes. And these are statements of what we expect students to demonstrate after they have been taught. And, of course, particularly this is known as the learning outcomes. Outcomes, of course, is with the different levels. This according to Biggs and Tang in 2007. So, of course, from institutional outcomes or the graduate attributes down to, of course, the program outcomes, the course outcomes, and, of course, lastly, the learning outcomes. So the most broad, of course, are the institutionals, and the most specific are, of course, the learning outcomes. Let's discuss, of course, what's institutional outcomes. When we say, of course, institutional outcomes, these are drawn Okay, the graduate attributes, and they are, of course, expected to demonstrate after graduation or finishing, of course, their studies. Then, we have, of course, program outcomes. These are outcomes that graduates or of program are expected to demonstrate at the end, of course, of the program. And we have also the course outcomes. So these are the particular subject outcomes that we have. Okay, then we have, of course, the learning outcomes, which is the most specific outcomes that the teacher is concerned within or his or her lesson. So that's, of course, the learning outcomes. Again, we have four different levels of outcomes that we have. The first is institutional, the second is program, the course, and of course, the learning outcomes. Other, of course, definition of the outcome-based education is according to CHED, which is an approach that focuses and organizes the educational system around what is essential for all levels, for all rather learners to know, value, and be able to achieve, or a desired level of competence. So of course, there are competence that we need to achieve. Okay, then we have, of course, according to the higher education institution, it is a means of describing the attributes of their ideal graduates based on their visions and missions as part of their institutional goals or outcomes, and using these as basis for developing specific program outcomes. OBE means, or outcome-based education means, it is actually defined by learning outcomes. It is also focused on and organized around and directed by the learning outcomes. So the learning outcomes here is very powerful. What is, of course, OBE? Another probably answer that we can have is, of course, it utilizes the OBE curriculum that outlines specific, measurable outcomes. Again, it outlines specific and measurable outcomes. The second one is, it is a method of curriculum design and teaching that focuses on what, take note, what students can actually do after they are taught. And the third one is, it is stated clearly not what the lecturer is going to teach, but what the outcome of that teaching is intended to be at and at what standard. We have also, of course, the principles of outcome-based education. And of course, we have four principles. The first one is, of course, clarity of focus. The second one is the design down. No. And the third one is high expectations. And the fourth, of course, is expanded learning. Let's discuss it one by one. So we have, of course, principles of the EBE, or OB rather. Okay, principle number one is more on, of course, clarity of focus. So here, of course, teachers must be clearly focused on what they want students to know, then understand and be able to do. Okay, in other words, teachers should focus on helping students to develop the knowledge, skills, and even the personalities that will enable, of course, them to achieve the intended outcomes that they have been clearly defined. The second one is, of course, designing down. So it means that, of course, the curriculum design must start with a clear definition of the intended outcomes that students are to achieve by the end of the program. Once these has been done, all instructional decisions of teaching and learning are then made to ensure the achievement of the intended learning outcomes. The third one is, of course, the high expectations. Here, teachers should establish high, challenging standards of performance in order to encourage students to engage deeply in what they are learning. Helping students to achieve high standard is linked very closely with the idea that successful learning promotes successful learning. The fourth one is, of course, expanded opportunities. So teachers must strive to provide expanded opportunities for all students in learning. This, of course, principle is based on the idea that not all learners can learn the same thing in the same way and in the same time. I repeat, this principle is based on the idea that not all learners can learn the same thing in the same way and in the same time. However, most students can achieve high standards if they are given appropriate opportunities. So as teachers, we need to provide opportunities for students to learn and of course to grow. We have, of course, the comparison of the outcome-based education and of course the traditional education. So you can see actually in the screen the OBE and of course the TE. TE denotes of course traditional education. So let's start with of course the TE. So in TE, of course, the learners are passive and it's more on examination driven. Wherein of course in the OBE it's active in terms of learners, then assessment is an ongoing thing or basis. Then, of course, there is integration of knowledge in the OBE, some wherein, of course, it's more on content-based syllabus, and it's more on textbooks and lecture centered in the traditional education. Whereas in, of course, the OBE, it's more on learner centered, and lecturers can be innovative and creative. Okay, and of course, the traditional education, the syllabus is very rigid, and lecturers, okay, are responsible for learning. However, in the outcome base, of course, lecturers can be innovative and creative, as what I've mentioned, and of course, learners, okay, are responsible, of course, for their own learning. And of course, the focus is more on emphasis on outcomes. And of course, there is flexible time frames, and of course, the learner determines pace. Okay, while in the, of course, traditional education, okay, the emphasis is on what lecturer hopes to achieve, and of course, the content is placed into rigid time frames. And of course, there is the rote learning. Okay, and however, in the outcome-based education, of course, as what I mentioned, it's flexible in time frame, and of course, there is critical thinking, and of course, reasoning and the action or the doing. Okay, that's of course the comparison of the outcome-based education and the traditional educations that we have. Okay, let's have the characteristics of the outcome-based education. So we have, of course, it has a program aims, the program learning outcomes. Okay, then course learning outcomes, and there are performance rather indicators. Then the second one is it is objective and outcome driven. Okay, where every stated objective and outcomes can be assessed and of course evaluated. Okay, and it is centered around, of course, the needs of the students and the stakeholders. And every learning outcomes is intentional. And therefore, the outcomes must be assessed using suitable performance indicators. So the performance indicator here is very important. Okay, we have also program objectives that, of course, address the graduates' attainment within 3 to 5 years after their graduation. And we have, of course, the program outcomes, which consist of the abilities to be attained by students before they graduate and are formulated based on the program objectives. Then we have also the program outcomes that address the KSA, or the knowledge, which is the K, the skills, so which is the S, and the attitudes rather, which is the A. Okay, to be attained by students. Again, of course, it addresses the KSA. And of course, teaching and learning method may have to do integrated to include, of course, different delivery methods to complement the traditional lecturing method. So let's have, of course, the components of the OBE. We have, of course, the three components. The first one is, of course, the curriculum, and it is focused more on the learning outcome, or the LO. And this can be, of course, prepared by curriculum expert. Then we have, of course, the second is the instruction, okay, which talks about, of course, teaching and learning activities, or the TLAs, and it's prepared by, of course, the lecturer, okay, or of course the professors, no? And the third one is, of course, the assessment, and it talks about the assessment tasks. Okay, for example, that we can have is the assignments, quizzes, projects, tests, reflective journals, the rubrics, and even, of course, the performance tasks or authentic tasks that we can have. Okay, and of course, it is prepared by the lecturers or the professors also. Let's have, of course, the instructional cycle. So we have, of course, three. So the first is, of course, we need to determine what are the learning outcomes intended for students. Then we have, of course, the teaching learning, which, of course, begins with the pre-instruction assessment, then followed by the teaching process, which includes, of course, the teaching learning activities, the formative assessment, and reteaching if necessary. So if you are, of course, a teacher and there's a need for you to reteach the subject or the lesson, you must, okay, do it in order to, of course, attain the learning outcomes that we have or the objectives for our, okay, lesson. And the last, of course, is the summative assessment. So after, of course, the teaching learning process, we need to have the summative assessment in order to, of course, know, okay, if we are attaining our learning outcomes. And take note, it is clear that which determines the content, the teaching, learning activities, the instructional materials in the instructional process and assessment is or are the intended learning outcome or outcomes. Then and only then we can call it outcome-based teaching and learning. Let's have, of course, the constructive alignment. So, of course, as teachers, we are expected to align everything. Okay, from, of course, our objectives to the TLAs that we have, or the teaching learning process, and of course the assessment that we have. So when we say, of course, constructive alignment, it refers to the process of creating a learning environment, of course, that supports the learning activities appropriate to achieve the desired learning outcomes. And of course, when we say constructive, okay, it means that what learner does to construct, meaning through, of course, relevant activities. And of course, alignment is what teachers does, like, of course, the components in teaching system, the teaching method used. So there should be alignment in these. We have, of course, the intended learning outcomes wherein it talks about the assessment methods of the teachers. Okay. And then, of course, what the assessment methods is and how we're going to design to assess, of course, the learning outcomes. And we have, of course, the learning activities, no? The learning and teaching activities, which, of course, are intended to design to meet learning outcomes also. So we need to, of course, have the alignment of the learning outcomes, and of course, the teaching and learning activities, and of course, the assessment. So this is also taken from, of course, Biggs, or adapted from Biggs in 1999. Of course, what are the expected changes for OBE implementation? So we have, of course, the following. Okay, the first one is, of course, modify existing curriculum. First, the modification of the curriculum, then revise course content and structure. And then we also have introduce innovative delivery or the teaching learning method. And of course, introduce innovative assessment and evaluation tools. And of course, introduce systems of data and evidence collection. And then, of course, the last is continuous quality improvement with, of course, our curriculum, so that, of course, we can have the changes with the OBE implementation that we have. Okay, let's have the importance of the OBE in the current scenario, or meaning in our current days. So you can have our current setup. Okay, we have, of course, the following reason. So, of course, the first is, of course, the current scenarios or issues. So there is the mismatch in supply and demand of our graduates. Okay, then we have, of course, the Polytechnic Transformation Plan. Okay, so there is, of course, the increase of graduate employability rate. We need to have that one. So from 53 probably to 85 to 90 and so on. So yeah, as probably the higher, the better. And we have, of course, the third one is the OBE versus traditional education, the one that we have in the previous slide. And of course, with this, graduates are not completely prepared for the workplace, okay, or the workforce rather. And we have, of course, the continuous quality improvement, or the CQI. Okay, so in order to have continuous quality improvement, we need to become, of course, innovative. Okay, and in our assessment and of course evaluation. Then there is, of course, the MQA requirement. Okay, this is more on the quality assurance that the program must be, of course, outcome-based education, okay, or the OBE, and of course, the National Transformation Agenda. We talks about, of course, the economic transformation program, okay, and of course, the new economic model, okay, of the Republic of the Philippines. So there is really, of course, a need for us to um, shift with the outcome-based education. Let's have, of course, the continual quality improvement, or the CQI. So here, of course, assessment and evaluation processes provide critical information to lecturers and administrators on the effectiveness of design. So we have also the delivery and the direction of an educational program, or the CQI. So improvements based on feedback from evaluations will close rather the system loop, and of course, the process will continue year after year. So we need to, of course, to improve. Okay, and by, of course, improvement, of course, there is progress. Okay, we have also, of course, the guiding principles in the OB assessment. So we have actually 8 here. The first one is, of course, assessment procedure should be valid. Okay, so procedure and, of course, tools should actually assess what one intends to test. The second one is, of course, assessment procedure should be reliable. So the results should be consistent, and assessment procedure should be fair. Okay, cultural background and other factors should not influence assessment procedure. So assessment should reflect the knowledge and skills that are important to the students. And number 5 is assessment should tell both the teachers and students how students are progressing. So the question is, of course, are your students, or are the students are progressing? And we have, of course, number 6, assessment should support every student's opportunity to learn things that are important. Okay, so it is necessary that we need to secure, okay, that, of course, have all the students supposedly have the support, okay, in order to learn things which are probably important for them. And then we have number 7, assessment should allow individuality rather, or uniqueness to be demonstrated. And of course, the last is assessment should be comprehensive to cover a wider range of learning outcomes. Okay. So the next is, of course, the outcome-based education approaches. How we're going to, of course, um, implement outcome-based education. So the first here is, let's have right good outcomes. So a good outcome is, among other things, okay, attractive. Okay, it talks about students want to achieve it. Okay, then the second one is comprehensible, okay, or comprehensive. So they know its meaning. Okay, then comprehensible. Okay, then the third one is attainable. They can learn to achieve it. And the fourth one is coherent. It clearly fits into their program. So again, a good outcome is, okay, attractive, comprehensible, attainable, and of course, coherent. Okay. Second is familiarize with the 2 models of curriculum. So model A is, of course, curriculum, which is content, and letter B, or model B, is curriculum outcomes, or curriculum is outcomes. Okay, let's differentiate the two. Okay, for model A, Okay, we need to plan, of course, the curriculum to be taught. While in Model B, plan the learning outcomes. Okay, we need to have first the learning outcomes. Second is ensure they are accessible. It can be assessed. And of course, plan learning activities. So you need to plan also what you're going to do. Okay, then in Model A, teach the curriculum content. Wherein in the Model B, provide resources, support, and feedback to the students as they do learning activities. In Model A also, we need to give feedback to aid student learning. Okay, but in Model B, we need to ensure students receive feedback. Okay, have they attained the course outcomes? That's the question. And of course, lastly, in Model A, assess what students have learned from the content, while in Model B, okay, it assess and have, of course, a detailed feedback to each student about their progress towards the outcomes. The third one is, of course, effective course delivery. So here is the responsibility of the teachers and the students. So the first is for the responsibility of teachers. Okay, the teacher should carefully plan, of course, on how you're going to deliver the course. The second is teaching strategy in accordance with the lesson. And of course, the last is incorporated new delivery strategies to address specific problem of the students. And then for the responsibility of the students, of course, must be responsible for their own learning. Okay. Then we have, of course, for number 4, we need to adapt OBE delivery models. So we have, of course, these delivery modes or models that we can have. So the first is, of course, face-to-face, wherein, of course, it involves lecture. There is, of course, a lecturer or the speaker. And we have, of course, the active. Okay, so active here can be, of course, through a presentation, either a tutorial rather, or a seminar. And then we have also the cooperative or collaborative type of mode. So here it is, of course, problem-based. Can be, of course, a case study and, of course, a project-based. Okay, we have also technology-based delivery. So the first is the most common is the online learning mode. Then we have, of course, the teleconferencing or teleconference, and of course, simulation that we can have. And then, of course, the last is the work-based learning. So it is through, of course, practical application, or of course, we have industrial training, work attachment, field trips, and of course, the visit that we can have. Again, we have, of course, 5 delivery modes. The first is face-to-face, active. Then we have cooperative and collaborative. Okay, technology-based delivery. And the last is, of course, work-based learning. Okay. We have also the application of the 4 common teaching situations associated with teaching learning activities. So we have, of course, situation here like the lecture, okay, wherein the teaching activities is teachers talk, explain, and clarify. And for learning activities, students needs to listen, take notes, okay, accept the query, then discuss with peers, and of course, you can also have the 1-minute paper activity. Okay, for tutorial, there is, of course, set answer questions. And of course, there is providing feedback, or you provide feedback. And then, of course, the learning activities is pre-read. Okay, then we have a pre-read rather. Okay, prepare questions, then learn from peers, critic, and of course, analyze. Then for, of course, project, so there is, of course, for teaching activities, we need to set a brief and, of course, provide ongoing feedback. Okay, for the learning activities, it involves applying, you apply, create, and of course, self-monitor, communicate, and of course, teamwork. For, of course, the last situation is the problem-based learning. So here, of course, for learning activities, you need to set problems, provides, of course, and provides feedback. Okay, then set learning goals in the learning activities, design, apply, access, okay, discard content and skills, then integrate, and of course, solve problem. So these are, of course, the 4 common teaching situations associated with TLE. Okay. And for our activities for this module, You need to have, of course, a reflection making. And this is, of course, through group discussion. And later on, of course, you will present. So here are, of course, the things that we need to include in our reflection making. So discuss how each of the following factors influence the needs to implement, of course, OBE. The first is, of course, the economic transformation program, then the new economic model. Okay. Then we have the program must be outcome based, and of course innovative assessment and evaluation. Then graduates are not completely prepared for the workplace. Then graduate employability, and the last is, of course, mismatch in supply and demand of graduates. So you, of course, you need to, of course, brainstorming on how these factors could influence, okay, why there's a need to implement outcome-based education in our curriculum. Okay, for our references, you can see here some of course, authors that we have taken the notes, and some of course, the uh, sites in the YouTube also, and even probably no slide share presentation. Okay, so we acknowledge, of course, the sources and of course the authors of this. Thank you so much. Okay, for of course being our benchmark for this lesson. Okay, thank you so much, and God bless everybody. I hope you learned something. See you, okay, in our next discussion. Bye-bye.